In this video, we're gonna explore the value of the final word. Final words are meaningful, right? Whether they're good or whether they're bad. Think about it. If you've ever left a conversation that was maybe heated, you may have felt bad about it, right? For a while after you said what you said. Or maybe you were leaving for a long trip or extended period of time, and you wanted to share something that was on your heart as you were on your way out the door. In addition to the final word, we're going to be exploring how looking back might actually be the best way to look forward. Yeah, stick around to the end. Hey, sometimes we get stuck forgetting how to move forward. I mean, honestly, getting stuck is the worst. Several years ago, I was speaking at a winter retreat up in Michigan, and I left camp to go get a burger because I was tired of the camp food, right? But dude, it was super duper icy. Like, not just like a little like snow dusting, like it was sketchy, all right? And so I started driving on this road that was sheer ice until all of a sudden I felt this crunch. And my car ended up like this, completely stuck, and I was terrified. I had to call the camp and ask, hey, that tractor I saw, like, is there any chance you could come and rescue me, right? And so then, this is actually me sitting in my car as this tractor pulls me out of the ice. I was elated to be free. Just look at the expression on my face right here when I realized I'm free. Pure joy. Give me a like if you've ever felt this happy for any reason, whether it's stuck or unstuck. And subscribe if you're like, dude, I've never been that happy. And regardless of if you have been or not been, turn the bell on because we are starting a brand new playlist today called Before I Go. But being stuck, let's be honest, being stuck is the worst. Especially being stuck in your faith. That's even worse. You see, Jesus, he actually gave some of his most profound words to some of his best friends right before he died. Whether you believe everything you've ever heard about Jesus, many would say that his actual words and the way that he lived has shaped history and culture in such a positive way. But sometimes our forgetfulness can be one of the biggest reasons that we feel stuck in our faith, especially in the realm of like having good and healthy relationships. You've been there, right? You get to class and the teacher says, all right, pass in your history project. Gulp. What history project? Your brain says to yourself. You definitely forgot about the history project. But what you didn't forget to do was play Fortnite with your buddies last night for 3 hours. And so maybe you've also, gotten in a fight before, right? And you look crystal clear in your depiction of this story. You're like, I said this, it was totally good, no heatedness, but my friends, they took exception with it, right? But that's probably not exactly how it went down for you, right? The same thing can happen a lot of times in our connection and in our relationship with God. We can focus so much on what's happening in front of us, like playing Fortnite or spinning our version of the story, that we forget the good things that have already happened. And sometimes we forget what God in our relationship with him has already done for us in the past. In fact, Jesus knew that about us as humans. He knew we would be forgetful. And so in the Last Supper, he shares some of this with his closest friends to help them out before it becomes a problem. Jesus and his closest friends and followers, you probably know them as disciples, they're sitting down at dinner and they're having a meal together. It was the Passover meal, which is a hugely important part of a traditional Jewish celebration. But what the disciples didn't know, and what the disciples didn't understand was going on, was that this would actually be their last meal with Jesus ever, especially not ever, but before his death, burial, and resurrection. So real quick, imagine that you were having a conversation with the people that you love the most. What would you tell them before you left? Drop it down in the comments below because I'd love to hear it. But before we get to exactly what Jesus said to his disciples, let's talk about what this dinner party was all about. Because what you might not know is that hundreds of years before Jesus even arrived on the scene on earth, God had miraculously saved his people, the Jewish people, from slavery in Egypt. He used all kinds of different miracles, things called the 10 plagues, and then he used the crossing of the Red Sea to get them out of the grip of slavery from Pharaoh and from the Egyptians. God actually sent a messenger, Moses, to request that God's people that were enslaved be released. And so every single time that Pharaoh would say no, God sent a new plague to kind of irk him and get under his skin and kind of speed up the process. Finally, the 10th and last plague was a really awful one though, and the firstborn child of every family died. Morbid, I know. But for the Israelite families, they actually had a way out of experiencing that punishment. So they were told that if they would slaughter a lamb and put lamb's blood across the door signs of their houses, that they, the Israelite people, in the night, that God would pass over their house. Pass over killing the firstborn male in their house and allow them to live, which we actually reference in this video, where we answer some of life's deepest, most theological questions right here on the screen. But this ended in so much pain in Egypt that Pharaoh finally let the Israelites leave. And so Moses leads God's people out of Egypt. It was the end of slavery and the new beginning for God's people. But from that moment on, the Israelites, also called the Jewish people, have had a tradition of remembering the Passover, the fact that God saved them with the lamb's blood over their door. And so they would actually have a meal to celebrate how God had rescued them and their ancestors out of slavery. And so they would gather around a table, a lot like many of us do for holidays, and retell the story of how God once brought them out of slavery and rescued them. But I don't want you to miss this, right? Because what was important about Passover, not where it came from or what they ate, but was the habit of remembering. And just like many of our holiday traditions, it includes food. Part of their meal involved eating bread, and bread that didn't have yeast in it. It was really thin, and they would drink wine. And actually, hang on, let me show you what I mean for a minute. And so this right here, this is the pita bread that they would eat with no yeast and no flour. And so this brings us back to the table where Jesus is celebrating. Jesus brought out the Passover meal, and it's probably dinner, right? Like how we think it's supposed to go. And they're telling the story of what had happened in the past. But Jesus does something different. And this is what it says. It says he took some of the bread and he gave thanks to God for it. Then he broke it in pieces. And he gave it to the disciples saying, hey, listen, this is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. It then says after supper, he took the wine and he said, this cup is the new covenant between God and his people, and it's an agreement with my blood, which is poured out now as a sacrifice for you. All of this you can read in Luke chapter 22 or hit the digital notes down below. But even though they may not have understood what Jesus meant, they knew that he had changed the meaning now of this whole Passover tradition. You see, the bread represents Jesus' body, and the cup, the wine, the juice, whatever your tradition uses, represents his blood. And what Jesus was saying is he's saying these things now represent my incredible love for you, which has compelled me to live with you and die for you. And so every time you eat this bread and drink this wine, I want you to remember me, remember my sacrifice for you, and remember my great love for you. You see, Passover was a special time of remembering, but what about the bread and what about the wine? See, the Jewish people, they had those every day. This was their normal food. This is what they would eat and drink. And so Jesus took two of the most ordinary parts of their lives, and he took them from ordinary and he made them significant. And you might be wondering why. Because he wanted them to remember him every time they ate and every time they drank. Because Jesus knew that life would be difficult. In fact, painful. Not just for the disciples, but for everyone who ever read his word or was a disciple on into the future, which also includes us. He knows that we tend to forget what has happened in the past. And so before he left, he taught his disciples the value of remembering. Remembering reminds us of what Jesus has done, is doing, and will continue to do. If we don't find ways to remember often, we turn into a spiritual Dory, like from Finding Nemo, with just ridiculous amounts of amnesia. So for those of you who have maybe been following Jesus for a long time, I'm guessing that there have probably been some significant moments in your life that you can remember, right? In those moments, it's easy to trust him. It's easy to know that he's there and that he's good. But I'm also guessing that you don't feel that way every single day of your life. It's easy to maybe feel far away or even forget why you ever trusted Jesus in the first place. If that's you, I want you to know something today. Jesus has never changed. He's the same as he was back when he broke this bread with his disciples. He's the same when you first trusted him with your life, and he's going to be the same on forever. Jesus doesn't change because God doesn't change. We just have to remember who God is and what God has done for us, right? And when we remember who God is and what he's done for us, it helps us keep a couple things in mind. The first thing is remembering with other people is powerful, but it also highlights that remembering actually takes work. You see, remembering helps us see God in the past and what Jesus did on the cross and through the Passover, so that we'll get unstuck like my car, right? And we can trust God now, not only in the present, but also on into the future. And part of the trick of all that, part of the trick of remembering and doing this kind of like the right way, is realizing that as we do this with other believers, we need to gel together to kind of have a unity, which is actually what we're going to be talking about in the very next video, which is linked right here on screen. I'd love for you to check that video out, and we will catch you over there.